video, we are going to talk about why cramming often fails and what you can do instead. Let's begin with an honest question. Have you ever waited until the night before an exam to start studying? Maybe you intended to begin earlier, but other assignments, work, family responsibilities, or unexpected problems got in the way. Maybe the exam seemed far away until suddenly it was tomorrow. Or maybe you were not sure how to begin, so you kept putting it off. If this has happened to you, you are not alone. Cramming is extremely common. It does not mean that you are lazy, irresponsible, or incapable of succeeding. Often, it means that you were busy, overwhelmed, unsure how to study, or trying to manage too many responsibilities at once. However, even though cramming is understandable, it is usually not the most effective way to prepare for a math exam. Let's talk about why. When you cram, you try to learn or review large amounts of material during one long study session. You may reread notes, watch several videos, look through homework problems, memorize formulas, or try to complete a large number of practice problems all at once. This can feel productive because you are spending a lot of time studying. By the end of the session, the material may even begin to feel familiar. But familiarity is not the same as understanding. When you look at the same examples repeatedly, you may begin to recognize the steps. You may think, yes, that makes sense, or I remember seeing that. The real question is whether you can solve a similar problem by yourself without looking at the example. That requires more than recognition. It requires you to remember the process, choose a strategy, complete the steps, check your work, and decide whether your answer makes sense. Those skills develop through practice over time. Math is not usually something you can learn simply by reading it once. Math involves connected skills. You need time to try problems, make mistakes, figure out what went wrong, ask questions, and try again. Cramming does not give you much time for that process. Imagine that you are studying equations. During a long study session, you might review several examples involving distribution, combining like terms, fractions, and variables on both sides. By the end of the night, the examples may look familiar. But if you did not practice each type independently, you may still have trouble deciding what to do when you see a new problem on the exam. Another problem with cramming is that it does not leave much time to discover and fix misunderstandings. Suppose you begin studying at 9 o'clock the night before your exam. At 11 o'clock, you now realize that you do not understand one of the major topics. Now you have a difficult choice. You can continue working late, search for more explanations, or hope that the topic is not a large part of the exam. If you had discovered that same misunderstanding several days earlier, you would have had more options. You could have asked your instructor a question, visited tutoring, watched another explanation, or practiced additional problems. Starting earlier does not guarantee that everything will be easy. It simply gives you time to respond when something is difficult. Cramming can also lead to mental fatigue. After working for several hours, it becomes harder to concentrate. You may read the same sentence repeatedly, make more arithmetic mistakes, skip important details, or convince yourself that you understand something because you were too tired to test yourself carefully. You may be spending more time studying while getting less benefit from each additional hour. Sleep is also an important part of learning. When you stay up very late before an exam, you may arrive tired, unfocused, and anxious. Even if you reviewed a lot of the material, it may be harder to remember information, follow directions, manage your time, or catch small mistakes. Sleep is not wasted study time. Rest helps your brain organize and strengthen what you practiced. So, what works better than cramming? A stronger approach is called spaced practice. Spaced practice means dividing your study into shorter sessions across several days. Instead of studying for 5 hours in one night, you may study for 30 to 45 minutes on several different days. During each session, you focus on a manageable amount of material. On the first day, you might list the topics on the exam and review 1 or 2 of them. On the second day, you might practice another topic and redo some missed homework problems. On the third day, you might work without notes and identify where you still need help. On the fourth day, you might ask questions and practice difficult problems. On the final day, you might complete a short mixed review and look over key reminders. This approach gives your brain repeated contact with the material. Each time you return to a topic, you have to remember some of what you learned before. That act of remembering helps strengthen your learning. Spacing also gives you time to forget a little. That might sound like a bad thing, but having to work to recall a process can be helpful. It shows you whether you can retrieve the information instead of only recognizing it while it is in front of you. A strong study plan also includes active practice. That means you do not spend all your time rereading notes or watching examples. You solve problems independently. You check your work. You correct mistakes. You explain ideas in your own words. You write down questions. Here's a simple study pattern you can use. First, choose one topic. Next, review one example or explanation. Then, close your notes and try 2 or 3 problems independently. Check your answers and identify where you had difficulty. Finally, decide what you need to do next. You might need more practice, another explanation, help from a tutor, or a review of an earlier skill. This entire process may take only 20 or 30 minutes, but it is much more useful than spending that time passively rereading several pages of notes. Now, what should you do if the exam is already close? Maybe you are watching this video and your exam is tomorrow. At that point, it is not helpful to feel guilty about what you should have done earlier. You can still make a useful plan. Begin by identifying the most important topics. Look at your study guide, recent homework, quizzes, class notes, and instructor announcements. Then, divide the topics into 3 groups. Topics you feel confident about, topics you partly understand but need to practice, and topics you do not understand yet. Spend most of your time in the middle group, the topics you partially understand. These are often the areas where a small amount of focused practice can lead to meaningful improvement. Choose a few important problems. Try them without notes. Check your work. Review the steps you missed. For topics you do not understand at all, focus on the main idea in the most basic examples. Do not try to master an entire chapter in one night. And please give yourself time to sleep. A focused review followed by rest will usually help you more than studying until you are too exhausted to think clearly. The goal is not to punish yourself for starting late. The goal is to make the best use of the time you have. For your next exam, try beginning a little earlier. You do not need to create a complicated schedule. Even starting 3 or 4 days before the exam can give you more time to practice, ask questions, and adjust your plan. Here is your action step. Look at the date of your next math exam. Count backward and identify at least 3 days where you could complete a short study session. Write down one specific task for each session. For example, on Monday, I will list the exam topics and review my notes. On Wednesday, I will redo missed homework and quiz problems. On Thursday, I will complete a short practice set without notes. A specific plan is much easier to follow than simply writing "study math." Remember, cramming often fails because math learning needs time, practice, feedback, and rest. You do not need to study perfectly. You do not need to study for hours every day. You just need to begin early enough to give yourself more than one opportunity to work on the material. Study a little. Check what you know. Return to the material. Ask for help. Get some rest, then try again. Every small study session is a step toward becoming more prepared. You can do this.